Welcome to this course, Research Method and Design. We are going to continue talking about this course. Last time we talked about questionnaires and we introduced the notion of variables. And I remember that I introduced the word variables in the first live lecture and in one of my lectures. Today we are going to talk about them deeply. You remember that I told you it's very important that when you choose your topic, you decide on the variables, because this is very important. The more variables, the bigger your research is. The fewer variables, the smaller and focused your research is. I remember that in the last lecture we talked about the example of using the Welsh language in schools and in official contexts. And we had the comparison of older and younger people towards using the Welsh language. And we said we have two variables, the attitudes towards using the Welsh language and the effect, the impact of age on this attitude. So this is your research. And let's modify this topic to say, for example, using the English language in Saudi Arabia in schools in general, from day one, from kindergarten until you finish the university. And we want just to measure the people, all the Saudi people attitudes towards this idea. Are they going to agree with using English from kindergarten until you finish your university? You study English language in all the subjects, no Arabic at all. They study mathematics, they study religion, they study even Arabic language in English. So let's have this example better than the Welsh example. So again, here we have age as the independent variable and its effects on people's attitudes towards this new idea. And then you want to start your research. You will find yourself that you don't only have these two variables. You would encounter other variables. What are you going to do with these variables? For example, you have age and attitudes, but how about the background of these peoples? Educated versus non-educated. We have some of our relatives or even some of people's parents, they are not educated at all. So these people, the non-educated, that they have never been taught English or they have never received any formal education, these people are going to affect your results. If you include much of them or many of them, they will affect your results. So you need to decide how you are going to stop this variable. This is just one variable. The background knowledge, the cultural information of your participants or people. We have also different factors, like, for example, political views. Do you have the authority to change the situation if you finish your research? Are you going to, you would say, well, I can recommend my results to the government, to the ministry, to the authority, but if you are going to include people in authority, they might affect your results. If you, for example, you know that you will find resistance from people in authority. Including them will affect your results. Are you going to include them? Or I'm not saying do not include them, but I'm saying think about these external variables. We are today going to talk about your central variables, but other variables that might affect your results or your research. Another variables, gender, male and female. You might have some kind of differences between male and female. Are you going to allow this difference to come and take part, or are you going to control this? So the idea from today's lecture that you need to know that you have some central variables that you are going to research, and these are variables are your interests, but there are some factors or some other variables that can affect your research, and you need to control them by one way or another. So let's start. Lecture 12, our research variables. So how many variables are centrally involved? As I said, you need to decide your central variables, your main variables. They are called central variables because they are your focus, the center of your research on these two variables. No one can say, well, this is the only scope and the only center of my research. They would admit, well, these are the center of my research, but there are other variables surrounding my research. They would admit this, believe me. No one can say, well, there are only these variables in my research and there are no other variables. No one can say this. They would say, well, this is my scope, this is my focus, but there are other factors that I excluded from my research for time, for limitation, for space restriction, and etc. Because no one can research all the factors, all the variables in just one research. So you need to decide from the beginning how many variables are centrally involved. So we are not counting here the variables you might want to exclude the effects of. See you later. Just those that are central to a research question or research hypothesis. So as I said, your central variables are central to your research questions and research hypothesis. As the example from the last lecture when I said older people will prefer to use Welsh more than younger people. So you see, in this hypothesis, we have two centers, preference, which is attitudes, and age. So age and attitudes are centrally linked to your research hypothesis. But still, we can have gender, male and female, affecting this preference of using Welsh. But it's not in the hypothesis. So gender is not central to my research, and I need to think about this. So is this a one variable design, two variable, three variables design? So you see, if you have just one variable, it's called one variable design. You want just to measure this one variable. A one variable example is how many students, how many good, talented students in my school. Just one variable. You want just to collect information about the best students in your school. This is a two variable design is like when I said age and attitudes. This is two variable design. You want just to see the effects of age on attitudes. A three variable design, you have age, gender affecting attitudes, or age affecting attitudes and beliefs, for example. So you have three variable, and it's called three variable designs. So from the beginning, you need to decide on this. So you know the design of your research. In the jargon, in the terminology, it's called univariate, bivariate, or beyond two variables. It may be either factorial or multivariate. Do not bother yourself with these terminologies. This is just to give you a flavor of the terminology of research. When you meet them, you would say, well, yes, I have taken these words from the course. It's not meant to go to discuss them or explain them in details, but just to give you a flavor. So when you speak in front of other people, you would say, well, I have studied research design, and we talked about univariate or bivariate or factorial or multivariate variables, but do not bother yourself. So as a rough guide is part of the previous statement. In this course, we stick to two variable designs. Yes, you see, mostly in my examples, I try to give you a two variable design, since understanding them probably is the key to understanding more complicated ones. So yes, if you understand the example that I gave you, that age affecting attitudes, it's the key to understand more complicated ones. In fact, often a study with many variables can be broken down into a whole lot of research questions, each dealt with as a two variable design. Yes, with age and attitudes, we can break this down into too many research questions dealing with age and attitudes. You would say, for example, older and younger attitudes, male and females attitudes, among males and females, who is older than the other, preference to use a language. For example, you would say older male people would prefer using English than older female people. So you see, you can break them down into more detailed hypotheses and questions. You would say, for example, younger female people would prefer to use English language more than older female or older male people. In a questionnaire, you ask Taiwanese senior high school learners of English their gender and also how often they use 20 different reading strategies. You also give them nations level tests to check their vocabulary proficiency. You then potentially have a whole lot of two variable analyses, each with its own research question and hypothesis, involving gender in relation to each of the 20 strategies and vocabulary proficiency in relation to each of the 20 strategies. So 42 variable designs are analyzed. Yes, here is an example about Taiwanese learning English, and you want to check only 20 strategies of their reading. You remember when you studied with me non-fictional prose and Nasr al-Ingrisi, we studied a lot of reading strategies. Say that you selected 20 of these reading strategies: skimming, scanning, metaphor, hyphenated nouns, compound nouns, using guessing from context, etc. You selected 20 reading strategies, and you want to check the use of these strategies. Are Taiwanese, our Taiwan learners, use these 20 reading strategies? If yes, are they using them properly, effectively, in a good way? In other words, so let's say that you want to also to have gender as one variable. Do male use these 20 strategies better than females, or vice versa? So the more you break down your research, the more analysis you will get. So 20 strategies by two genders, you have males and females, 40 strategies. 20 for males and 24 females, you have 40 strategies. And for each strategy, you will have a hypothesis and a research questions. You will say something like, males will use skimming better than females. This is one, for strategy number one. For strategy number two, you would say, for example, something like, females will use guessing from context better than males. And you will go on. You will end up with 40 questions or 40 hypotheses. That means 40 analyses. It takes time. It's painstaking, but it's worth it. It pays off at the end when you come up with a complete research with new findings and you establish yourself as a researcher. So you see, the central variables, by deciding on them, you can get a lot of analysis. The second questions you want to ask yourself, what roles do the central variables each play? You need to know their role. Often one think of one or more variables as potentially explaining or causing or affecting or predicting one or more of the others. This is the when I talked about dependent and independent variables. We need to specify the role, which is the dependent and which is the independent. And here it's called explaining variables, because the variable explains the other. Age explains to us the use of strategies, or explains to us the attitudes towards English. But it's not a big deal. You can call them either explaining or independent variable. It would be odd to, for instance, gender would be regarded as explaining any differences in use of strategies we find. It would be odd to regard the strategy use as somehow affecting people's gender. As I mentioned before, you cannot well say, well, gender is the dependent variable. No. For example, are you going to get older faster if you learn English, or if you have a positive or a negative attitude towards English, or if you use more reading strategies? Are you going to get older? No, it's the opposite. Age affects or explains the dependent variable. In the jargon, the explaining variable or variable is perhaps most neutrally labeled the explanatory variable, EV, as I prefer, but many call it the independent variable. As I said, you can call it IV, independent or explaining variable, or in some special design circumstances, factor or predictor. This just to give you the names of these variables. Whenever you meet them while you are reading an article or a piece of research, you know what they are talking about. So you don't say, well, Dr. Abdullah did not introduce these names to us. The other variables are then dependent variable. You can read the rest of these, because I don't want to be repetitive, because I repeated this a lot. There is a reason for talking in weaker terms and saying that one variable. So let's read from here. Much language research is not experimental in the true sense, and the conventional wisdom is that it's only in a proper experimental that cause and effect can definitely be demonstrated. This is very important to know, that people think that all research is experimental, that we have an experiment. No, it's not an experimental at all. It's an experimental in a sense, as we are going to see in a minute, if we have, for example, an intervention, like the example of computers. It's an experiment. I want to experiment using computers and its effect. But how about attitudes? I want to measure students' attitude. It's not experiment. It's called a study. So this is the difference between an experiment and a study. Is this an experiment in the strict sense? This is, I answered this earlier. What variables are or should be considered additionally to the central EVs and DVs, explaining variables and dependent variables. These are variables that you might need to control in the sense of exclude the effects of, which I call CVs. CVs means variables that need to be controlled variables, or excluded. As I said, if you just want to see the effect of age on attitudes and you don't want to have gender as a variable, you need to exclude gender. How? You get a representative sample of males and females. So at the end, when you get your results, you can, by confidence, say, well, I controlled gender. They would ask you how. You would say, well, I included a representative sample of males and females. So both males and females contributed to the answer to my questions. So there is no a gender effect here. Or you would, from the beginning, say, well, I want to control gender by having only males. I don't want females. So by this, you excluded gender from your variables. So either from the beginning, you exclude the other variables, or you include them in some way by having a representative sample of all of these variables, but you don't include them in your analysis. You don't bother about gender, for example, in your analysis. When you analyze your results, you don't think about gender. So they may well not be mentioned in the research question hypothesis, but are nevertheless crucial. There are things that may otherwise interfere with the results and make it hard to interpret what you discover about the central variables in the design. Yes, sometimes you reach very complicated results and you want to explain them. And then when you go back to your data, you would find, well, the answer may be because gender. So it's hard from the beginning. It's a tough decision. Maybe sometimes you will regret. You would say, well, I wished that included that CV, that control variable in my analysis. You can control or eliminate such variables in various ways. One is by making them constant. You choose only people in their 20s for a study comparing men and women. Yes, you make them constant. You want to compare males and females without age effects. Well, choose one range of age, or just one age, people in their 20s. So you controlled age here, or vice versa. You control gender, as I said, and you select only males, thus eliminating the age variation factor. For an experiment where people read two types of text, a narrative and argumentative, you make all the texts at the same level of vocabulary difficulty. Another way is to randomize the variable, or more often claim it as good as random, even though you have not strictly randomized it. To eliminate age, you pick men and women randomly of all ages, so hopefully you will not get a lot more older people in one group than in the other. As I said in my example, you want to exclude gender, get a randomized representative sample of male and female from the beginning. So whenever you are asked about this later, you would say, well, I did not mention gender. I did not want to talk about gender, but in my data there were too many males and too many females, so you cannot say, well, gender affected my results. We have already seen also the stratified sampling solution to this sort of problem, where you would pick equal numbers of people of different age groups in each gender, and the use of the matched subject design, which also eliminate this if age is chosen as one of the variables to be used for matching. Well, yes, a matched subjects, you have two matched subjects, same age, same criteria, same characteristics, same features, same background knowledge, and etc. This is one way of eliminating variables. So you can read the rest of it. Then you may have what is called a confounded design. You want to compare people's strategies depending. This is just more examples as you go. I don't want to go into details with them, because I think what's important for me that you understand the dependent variables and independent variables, or what is called explained variables. In much language research, ideal control is not possible. Yes, this is very true. You cannot have what is called an ideal control of all the variables, and this is well known in research. You cannot claim all this. I perfectly controlled my my variables. Well, you cannot say this. In theory, it's only in experiments that it could be fully achieved. For example, suppose you study learner behavior going on in classes in a school taught by two different means, which could be either naturally occurring means or ones you're experimentally imposed. It's like the example that I mentioned. You have two different teaching methods with computers and without computers. This is fully experimental design, and it's fully controlled. Why? Because in the group which does not have computers, you controlled computers. They don't have access to computers, so you controlled the computer variable on that group. With the other group, they have computer, so you see in this example the control of the variable is complete. You will typically have to use existing classes in text group rather than take students and randomly assign them to the two method groups. Yes, because in this example, you have two classes. You don't need to select them randomly. No, you will take the class intact as it is, the whole class. For example, the grammar class and the section A, and the grammar class section B. You take them as they are, so you don't need to randomize them and etc. Hence, you cannot control whether, say, more proficient students get into one group than the other. Yes, and here is very important. Maybe you have in section A here better students than section B. So controlling proficiency is out of your hand. The best you can do here is to at least record as much as you can about the subjects in the two classes with a little background questionnaire. Then you can afterwards use the information about proficiency, for example, to help interpret the findings and maybe analyze the data with the effects of proficiency statistically taken into account and discounted by treating the offending variable as a covariate in the analysis. But that is an advanced topic which I don't want also to talk about. So, as I said, you cannot control proficiency, but you can use proficiency later to explain your results. And I don't want to talk about advanced topics to avoid confusion. I don't want to confuse you, but as I said, sometimes I introduce information to you just for general knowledge, and there are some key important information. The key important information, you would see that I try to explain for longer time, and I try to repeat them many times. The other information just for your ledger and for your general information. Obviously, the alternative research paradigms do not lend themselves to control and rely heavily on delicate interpretation by the researcher of how all the uncontrolled factors might have affected what is observed. Yes. So at the end, you would say, well, there are some uncontrolled variables that might affect my result, and you need to admit this in your research. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you, inshallah, in the next lecture. And in the 14th lecture, we will try to summarize everything, and I wish you all the best.